Hello, I am Riya Mandal. Today we are going to talk about respiratory center. So first, we have to know where this respiratory center is located. This respiratory center is located in the medulla oblongata and pons in the brainstem. There are three important brainstem respiratory centers. They are pneumotaxic center or pontine respiratory group and dorsal and ventral respiratory groups. At first, we are going to discuss about pneumotaxic center. Pontine respiratory group or pneumotaxic center is located in the dorsal lateral pons. This PRG contains inspiratory, expiratory and face spanning neurons, receives vagal afferents relating to lung volume and modulates respiratory frequency. Its primary connections with hypothalamus, cerebral cortex and neurons of tractus solitarius. PRG neurons are not essential for respiratory rhythm generation, and transaction at this level produces regular breathing. Vagotomy then results in slowing of respiratory rate but not in alternation of the rhythm. The center is involved in modification and fine control of respiratory rhythm. Apneusis is defined as end inspiratory pauses that can be produced by pontine transactions in vagomotized animal. The modulary respiratory neurons generate respiratory rhythm, and transaction of the brainstem at pontomodulary level allows rhythmic ventilation excursions to persist, whereas these movements are obliged by the transaction at the modulary cervical region. The output from the modulary respiratory centers descends in the reticulospinal tract in the anteroreticulus fasciculus in the spinal cord. Next is dorsal respiratory group. Dorsal respiratory group is located in the medulla. DRG neurons are mainly inspiratory and are located in the ventrolateral portion of the nucleus of the tractus solitarius, primarily discharging during inspiration and receiving pulmonary afferents via vagus nerves. These neurons primarily project to the contralateral spinal motor neurons and probably serve as the primary rhythmic drive to phrenic motor neurons. DRG motor neurons are modulated by GABA receptors. Then there comes ventral respiratory group. Ventral respiratory group is also located in medulla. The VRG neurons are both inspiratory and expiratory neurons situated in a bilaterally symmetric column that extend from the caudal level of facial nucleus to the rostral cervical spinal cord. The cell bodies are located within the nucleus ambiguous and nucleus retroambigualis are responsible for the generation of respiratory rhythm. NMDA receptors are major mediators of VRG. VRG ventrilaterally drive with modulation by non-NMDA glutamate system. The cerebellum also influences breathing. In animals, stimulation of fastigial nucleus produces early termination of bursting of both the inspiratory and expiratory neurons. Functional imaging studies in animals stimulation of fastigial nucleus produces termination of bursting of both the inspiratory and expiratory neurons. Imaging studies in humans have also documented activation of cerebellum along with other brainstem structures during volitional breathing. During anxiety, fear, and depression, the breathing pattern is changed. In these cases, hypothalamus sends the information to the respiratory center and helps to affect how a person is breathing. Cerebellum is also responsible for the voluntary control. Involuntary respiration is controlled by the respiratory center in the upper brainstem, sometimes termed the lower brain, along with the cerebellum. This region of the brain controls mainly involuntary and metabolic functions besides the respiratory system, including certain aspects of cardiovascular function and involuntary muscle movements in the cerebellum. The respiratory centers control chemoreceptors that detect pH levels in the blood and send signals to the respiratory centers of the brain to adjust ventilation rate, to change acidity by increasing or decreasing the removal carbon dioxide, since the carbon dioxide is linked to higher levels of hydrogen ions in the blood. There are also peripheral chemoreceptors in other blood vessels that are perform to these functions as well, which includes aortic and carotid bodies. Then there comes medulla oblongata that helps as primary respiratory control center. Its main function is to send signals to the muscles that control respiration to cause breathing to occur. There are two regions in the medulla that control respiration. The ventral respiratory group stimulates the expiratory movements. The dorsal respiratory group stimulates the inspiratory movements. The medulla also controls the reflex for non-respiratory air movements, such as coughing and sneezing reflex, as well as other reflexes like swallowing and vomiting. Then there comes Pons. Pons is the other respiratory center and located in the underneath the medulla. Its main function is to control the rate or speed of the involuntary respiration. It has two main functional regions to that perform this role. The apneustic center sends signals for inspiration for long and deep breaths. It controls the intensity of breathing and inhibited by stretch receptors of the pulmonary muscles at maximum depth of inspiration or by signals from the apneumatic center. It increases tidal volume. The pneumotaxic centers send signals to inhibit inspiration that allows it to finely control the respiratory rate. Its signals limit the activity of phrenic nerve and inhibits the signals of the apneustic center. It decreases tidal volume. The apneustic and pneumotaxic centers work against each other together to control the respiratory rate.